Mr. Trump is charged with 37 federal counts related to alleged mishandling of classified material. He's also charged with 34 counts in New York State of falsifying business records related to alleged hush money payments. The former president remains under investigation in Washington, D.C. and in Georgia over efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Mr. Trump has denied any wrongdoing. Joining me now to talk about this is Brian Claypool, trial attorney and legal analyst. Brian, good afternoon.
Hi, Nick. Great to be with you.
Good to have you here because, we want to jump right in there and talk about Mr. Trump talking about how Mr. Biden is weaponizing the Justice Department. And the Justice Department wants a December 11th federal trial for the former president. How likely is that to happen?
Yeah, Nick, it's impossible to happen. And here's why. There's two reasons why. There's what's called a Classified Information Procedures Act. That's a law that was put in place in the early 2000s. It's to create a protocol in a situation like this where there is classified information to make sure that this information is protected during the jury trial, to make sure that, for example, the defendant doesn't release any of this classified data during the trial. The court has to comply with this act. Why is that important? Because in order to do so, Trump's lawyers, for example, have to go through a very rigorous security clearance before the classified information, these 31 pages, can even be shared with his lawyers. That clearance process, Nick, could take up to 2 to 3 months. So that's the first issue. Second issue is all Trump's got to do, his lawyers need to go into court and say, look, I'm going to waive my right to a speedy trial. The Constitution gives you a right to a trial usually within 120 days. That's why Judge Cannon set this trial in August. If Trump's lawyers just go in and say, we waive this right, then the judge will be less on a fast track and the noose on her neck will be loosened.
Mr. Claypool, what makes this case so complicated? I heard you just talk about the high security documents. Is it because the defense team needs to be cleared, or because the prosecution can already see this information, or is it because only X amount of information can be shared with a potential jury?
That's a great question. It's a combination of both. That's excellent. It's both. There has to be absolute clearance on all lawyers involved in this case. They've got to do copious background checks to make sure they have high integrity. And then you're right. For example, Nick, what information gets to the jury? You've got 12 strangers on a jury. You've got highly classified information regarding that could, impair national security. You've got to have a protocol in place for the jurors as well. And then on top of that, you're going to have motions filed by Trump that could arguably delay the trial. The biggest ticket item he has, Nick, is this motion to suppress any evidence that was generated between communications between Trump and his former lawyer, Evan Cochran. I mean, that's a game changer. And if Trump loses on that motion, for example, right, he's going to file a motion to suppress, then he's going to appeal that. And that appeal process has to go through the 11th Circuit in Atlanta, which could take, months. And then if he loses there, he's going to take that all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that could take another 6 months. And he might even win on that issue with the U.S. Supreme Court. So this is going to be a really long process, and this might go beyond the 2024 election.
And Mr. Claypool, two more questions I want to ask and follow up on that there. There's been a lot of chatter about Mr. Trump struggling to find a qualified legal team to represent him in this case against the special counsel, the special prosecutor. There's also a list of 84 names long that the special counsel has given to Mr. Trump, all of them with people with whom he shouldn't discuss the case. How does a team that he has yet to really assemble argue against some of those names that Mr. Trump may have professional dealings with that have nothing to do with this actual case?
That's another complicated issue for this trial, Nick. I mean, doesn't that create a possible freedom of speech issue for Trump as well? I mean, the federal government's going to come in and say, hey, we've got 84 individuals we want the court to tell you, President Trump, you can't talk to about this case. I mean, I guarantee you, Nick, that Trump's lawyers are going to file challenges to many of those witnesses, if not all of them. And what's that going to do? It's going to force the prosecution's hand, because Judge Cannon then is going to force the prosecutors to put up what's called an offer of proof. They're going to have to prove why Trump can't talk to these folks. Why is that important? because that, in effect, is going to force the prosecutors to preview their case to Trump's lawyers. So Trump's lawyers would be smart to challenge all those witnesses. And also that, again, is going to delay this trial. Can you imagine if you were the judge and had to go through 84 witnesses and determine whether a former president can talk to them?
I have to believe it can't be any more difficult than it would be to be a juror watching the former commander-in-chief have to defend himself in a court of law. Hey, thank you so much. One quick question, though, for you, Brian. When you say that this will not happen in December, when do you think that things actually will move forward?
Yeah, if I was President Trump's lawyer, Nick, I would actually ask Judge Cannon to vacate the trial date. That means that they can ask her to say, look, let's remove this trial date and set up what's called a pretrial conference. That's typically what's done, Nick, in a lot of high-profile criminal cases. So, I'd ask for the judge to vacate the trial date in December, set a pretrial conference sometime in the spring. And if she doesn't do that, then alternatively, from Trump's lawyers, I would ask Judge Cannon to set a trial date further out next year, let's say the spring or summer of next year. And then, Nick, what happens is the lawyers show up before that and they answer whether they're ready or not. And it's not uncommon for there to be several trial continuances before a case like this that's so complex ever gets to trial.
Wow, Brian Claypool, trial attorney and legal analyst, making it clear that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
You bet. Thanks, Nick.